Councillors, officers and members of the public, welcome to Wednesday the 21st of August 2024 Development Assessment Committee. I will now open the meeting with presence and apology. We have all councillors in attendance tonight, so thank you. Recording of minutes. In accordance with Moorabool Shire Council's governance rules, Council will be recording tonight's meeting. Item 4 and 5, confirmation of minutes and matters arising from previous minutes. Councillors, prior to confirming, are there any matters arising from previous minutes? No. Do I have a councillor to move last month's minutes? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Seconded by Councillor Edwards. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Item 6, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Councillors, does anyone have a conflict of interest to declare? I do. My conflict is on item 7.2, so I will vacate the chair at that point. Thank you. We will now move on to community planning reports. Item 7.1, development of an office building and a reduction of car parking, 5 car spaces at 114 English Street, Balan. We have one registered speaker to this item, Mr. James Robson. James, if you just would like to take a seat. I know you're quite familiar, but just the green button when you're ready, and you will have 3 minutes to speak, and then afterwards councillors will be able to ask you questions if they wish. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. James Robson is my name, and I'm acting for the applicant in this matter. I have here with me Mr. Robert Esdale, who is one of the volunteer board members of the applicant, the Moorabool Community Enterprises Group, trading as Balan District Community Bank, who is able to answer any specific questions you might have in relation to the broader development. So the proposal before you tonight is to develop the small vacant parcel of land at 114 English Street, Balan, with a small-scale single-storey brick building for use as an office, and to reduce the statutory requirements for car parking by 5 spaces. This small-scale office development is within the main commercial precinct of Balan and is close to the recently approved council-led library project, which has received approval for a waiver of 60 car parks. Having read through the officer's report for the proposal, the proponent has no issues with the bulk of the permit conditions which have been recommended. However, we do raise concerns regarding the proposed condition 12, which requires a $50,000 payment in lieu of car parking being made to council. Based on our review of a number of VCAT decisions, specifically the Rashid versus Hepburn Shire Council decision, which I believe you've all been provided a copy of by the applicant, it is our view that the imposition of such a permit condition infringes the requirements of section 62 of the Planning and Environment Act. The Rashid decision refers to such permit conditions as, and I quote, the proposed form of the permit condition involved a discredited form of drafting that clearly infringes the requirements of section 62.5 and 62.6 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. On this basis, it is our view that council are unable to impose such a permit condition for this proposal in line with historic VCAT findings. I do have a copy of that decision with me here if you wish to review. But as indicated, aside from that mentioned condition 12, the proponent has no further concerns regarding the proposed conditions for this permit.
Thank you, Mr. Robson. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr. Robson?
Whatever, mate.
Yes, Councillor Sullivan.
Mr. Robson, in that VCAT decision at Hepburn Shire, was it in all instances similar to this or not?
Sorry?
Was it in all instances similar to this or not?
Yes, so it was a similar. It was 3 car parking spaces that were being waived. So it was it was in the Dalesford town centre, so similar regionally based locality for a restaurant as opposed to an office.
Supplementary question, if I may. And what did Hepburn Shire impose on the original condition that went to VCAT? Do you know?
So it was for a payment of $12,000. The condition was for a payment in lieu of car parking for $12,000. So a similar condition to what's being proposed for this one.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr Robson? Councillor Tatchell.
I'd like to move the item in front of us with the removal of item 12. I'll explain why, but for different reasons that Mr Robson suggested anyway.
So you're proposing to move an alternate removing item 12?
Item 12.
Is there any other questions for Councillor... Mr Robson? No? Thank you, Mr Robson. You can take your seat. Councillors, any other questions for officers? Councillor Dudzik.
Over the past few years, I'm pretty sure that council has imposed this requirement on a number of different properties. Can officers confirm that my recollection is correct?
Mr Lovell.
Yeah, so through the chair, that is correct. There have been cash in lieu contributions made for car parking waiving, both in Bacchus Marsh Activity Centre and in Beland, and generally they are done in agreement with the applicant.
Any other questions for officers? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just curious as to where the figure of $10,000 per car park was. Where did it come from, I guess? And do we have a separate account for monies that are raised for car parking, so to be put aside, or does it go into the general coffers and not a... I know they used to call it Jam 10 accounting, but I think at least there was some connection between the monies raised and where the money was kept. So I suppose the first question is, how was the 10,000 arrived at? So I suppose is there some methodology, please?
Mr Lovell or Mr Bazout now?
Yeah, so through the chair, that 10,000 has sort of been an estimation done in the past of how much it costs per car space to construct new car park areas. And to that second part of where the money goes, it cannot be used in consolidated revenue. It actually has to be used for future car parking. So it is kept into an account until that either land or provision becomes available.
Any other questions for officers? No? So we have an alternate that has been moved by Councillor Tatchell to remove item 12. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ward. Any dissent? Councillor Edwards. Councillor Tatchell, you will open the debate. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. Look, the omission of item 12 is not because of the argument that was put up about Darlesford. I really don't care what happens in Darlesford. I don't think people in Darlesford care what happens in Darlesford. But we're here to talk about what happens in the main street of Beland. When that building was built, the original two-storey building, there was always an arrangement that was put in place that there would be a block on land, there was a house there, and then it was supposed to be the continuation of that building. And those buildings were built with no parking waivers as such. This block of land has been a problem for many, many years because it sits there. We have very little choice in terms of what we do. And I don't agree that the parking waiver is the issue because basically we normally come to agreement with people and they're over blocks of land exactly like this, that as it was left out of the original building structure, it was left in no man's land, and then it was purchased, and it was always going to have a parking issue, and timing being what it is, eventually we had an issue in terms of how we had to produce parking waivers. So this block of land's been caught up in that somehow. Whilst I agree that we have got an issue in terms of parking waivers, we also have an issue in terms of historical businesses that lay in the main street of Beland. Also, I'd just like to note that the block behind the library is designated as a car park for later, but even so, the other block belongs to council anyway, so the library more than complies with the amount of parking required. We have two choices here. We knock this back. I don't believe this thing will win it, VCAT. I think if we knock this back, I think it's going to have a problem because it's got no parking. And we end up with an eyesore in the main street. So we have to either put this thing to bed, and the best way to put it to bed introduce the waivers, get rid of the block off the scene. It's the last one in the main street that has an issue. I'm disappointed we brought a Daylesford argument into this. Every other problem we've had in terms of car parking waivers, we've been able to agree with the applicant on the basis that, well, we can't give you a permit unless you've got a waiver. Now, if you want us to put a permit in, by all means, you're prepared to pay for parking issues elsewhere. Current parking costs are $40,000 a slot, and rising, and so the price is reasonable. So the only differential with this particular permit is the fact that it's a small block that was caught up in a really bad decision many years ago, and I don't think people should be penalised for it many years later when the other people have got the benefit of having free car parking waivers to build what they've built. So that's my story. Let's see what Councillor Edwards has got.
Thank you, Councillor Tatchell. As the opposing, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just in short, councillors, I'll keep this brief. So I agree with Councillor Tatchell. We should do one or two things. We should either enforce the requirements to have a number of car parking. In this particular case, they haven't actually given us reasonable justification as to why the exemption is required. So we do quite often provide exemptions where we don't require 10,000, but normally that would be done in a case where the business can demonstrate, for example, they're operating in completely different hours. The issue we have if we continually allow these things to go ahead is that council gets the bill. So what you're actually saying by allowing this to go forward is that council will get the bill when we have to provide more car parking. We just updated Bland Main Street. Council done a really good job on that, included additional car parks at significant cost to the ratepayers. I don't believe anyone should get a free kick. If they could demonstrate that there was no additional, why the additional spaces were not required for this particular business, I would be okay, but there is no demonstration of that. This is purely a fact of we don't want to provide the car parks. Partially because it's very difficult to do, but in this case, contribute something towards council and then they will build the car parks in the future. Otherwise, long term, we're going to end up in a case like we have in Bacchus Marsh where you get people going, who approved this? There's nowhere to park. You go down the main street, you can't park. That's bad for all businesses. So that's my view. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I support Councillor Tatchell's moving this recommendation with an amendment to remove item 12. I'll be short and sweet, quite simply because people would see this as a bank, which it is, but at the end of the day, it's a community-owned enterprise, and all the profits and revenue are invested. Sorry, all the profits are invested back into the community for the community benefits. So I'd be far more comfortable seeing $50,000 that's proposed in cost invested in community grants or back in community returns into the community in this instance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Would any other councillor like to speak on the motion? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm somewhat ambivalent about this one, to be honest with you, because we've applied this fee in the past. I mean, if there was a compromise fee offer put forward, it might be more reasonable. This is all or nothing. And it does sort of potentially create a precedent that the next time it comes along, how do we defend our stance then? And the other thing that I'm concerned about is we're sort of doing this in the absence of a proper car parking strategy for the whole of the land, in the sense that this is in the older part of Bland, and I think the same happens in Bacchus Marsh, where you're looking at repurposing sites. You get a situation where you can't actually satisfy some of the parking requirements because you're building a new building on an old site or refurbishing it, and you just can't do it. So we've got to then try and balance the economic benefits and the car parking. But I think, as Councillor Edwards said, sooner or later this will come back and bite not this council, but a future council very hard. So it'd be my preference if this was actually delayed until we could actually have something more substantial in the discussion about is there a medium ground here to be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Any other councillors wish to speak? No?
Madam Mayor, can I just foreshadow another motion if this one is lost?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Tatchell, you'd like to close the debate.
Well, there you go. Well, I can't argue with Councillor Edwards or Councillor Sullivan on this, can I? But every now and then I think in the council the one thing about the DAC, it's about exceptions. And one thing the DAC was designed to do was create exceptions. And I think Councillor Ward made some very good points about the particular applicant in this. We see in country towns all over country Victoria where banks left in droves, and it made it incredibly difficult for country people to carry out their normal banking processes. And then things like community banks came along, and they were purely driven by the community that they live in. And the Bendigo Bank in particular is driven by every community that it sits in. So it's not a global thing. It's basically the community run it, the community of the board, and the community get the benefit from it. And so in terms of exception, I've got two exceptions here. One is that I think that the building that was built there, and I was in Balham when it was built, it's a long time ago now, but there was absolutely no doubt there was going to be an issue with that block. And it was difficult to deal with then, and it's difficult to deal with now. And we've spoken about this for many years, what's going to become of it because of the parking issue. And, there's been discussions with the hotel, and now that the hotel's closed there, and we don't know what the future of that is, about how we could explore parking spaces to deal with this empty block. We're trying to encourage economic development in a country town. We're trying to encourage that our main street is complemented by an array of services that we need to complement towns this size that are in a growing pattern. So that's one of the exceptions. And of course, the other exception is that when we're dealing with community type processes, and it's interesting that within the argument tonight, the library was brought up with exactly the same reason. It's there for the community. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't entertain this at all, and I totally agree with Councillor Edwards and Councillor Sullivan. I mean, we've spent a lot of money on car parking in Blade, and a lot of people have got a free ride, and there'll be a lot of people that try and build things into the future that probably are going to be caught up in this. But on this particular occasion, I think we have an exception, and we have two reasonable exceptions to allow some justification. I'd rather see the $50,000 go back into the community via the Bendigo Bank. They've done a lot of work since they've opened. There's millions of dollars that have actually been spent around the district. So, yes, well, it's just easy to put it back in the coffers and build another car park. It's actually one car park space and probably the grill off of DeSoto. So at the end of the day, I'm asking councillors to sort of run with me on this. This will be the last year of having a ward councillor that lives in your region, which is probably atrocious. But in my view, as a sitting councillor, and we're about to end that clause, and I think it's interesting that Tom said, but there'll be another council coming after us. When you only got a couple of months to go, you think about that and go, well, we can always leave something in the drawer, even if it is ticking. But anyhow, so I'm asking the councillors to go along with me on this one, if you would, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tatchell. So I will just make it clear that Councillor Tatchell has put an alternate to issue a planning permit with the removal of item 12. We have a mover of Councillor Tatchell and a seconder of Councillor Ward. I will put the motion to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? It is lost. Okay, we will go back. And Councillor Edwards, you did foreshadow.
I'd like to defer the item so that consideration could be given to as to what a reasonable fee would be in this situation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sullivan, you have a second. You would like to second? Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, item 7.2. I will vacate the chair, but before I do, because I have a conflict of interest on this item, Before I vacate, I will just, if anyone would like to nominate someone to chair this item, that would be lovely, please, councillors. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Any dissent? All those in favour? Thank you, Councillor Berry.
Councillors, we have item 7.2, a development of a farm shed and ancillary to an existing dwelling at 49 Calwell Lane South, Gordon. The motion is for the item to receive a permit. Can I have a nomination for a councillor to...
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Is there any dissent? No? The item is moved. Thank you.
The item. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Okay, we will now move on to the next report, which is item 7.3, development of 3 dwellings at 2 Leela Court, Bacchus Marsh. There are no speakers to this item. Councillors, you have a recommendation in your paper tonight. Do I have a councillor to move? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Do I have any dissent? All those in favour? Oops. Yep. Yes, Councillor Thatcher, you have a question for officers?
Interesting Leela Court, isn't it? This was part of the irrigation zone. Originally, it was it sat around for, I think, 7 or 8 years. They tried to get this through because there was no water rights on the property, and yet the property below it, or next to it, sitting on 10 acres, hasn't been afforded exactly the same rights as this property. And here we are. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of argument over many, many years to get Leela Court through, and there was a minimum amount of houses that had to be put there, and then all of a sudden, like magic, we've already got a 3-lotter come through on exactly the same property. So my question is, if we've got a green apple in one basket and a red apple in the other, are they still apples? Because that's what Leela Court is. And why is it so?
Mr Lovell.
Through the chair, just to explain, so Leela Court is an established residential zone, and there was a previous existing dwelling on that land which has now been demolished. So they are doing development within the residential zone, and as you can see immediately to the north, you've got the old farming lots, if you go to page 27 of your papers, and that land again has a different zoning and a different requirements, but this is within an established residential precinct.
Well played, Mark.
All right. If there's no other questions, I had a mover and a seconder. Any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. All right. Item 7.4, demolition of a building signal box at Bacchus Marsh Railway Station, Station Street, Madingley. We have 3 registered speakers to this item. I will first ask Jay Nunn from V-Line has provided a written submission, which has been on your desks for some time, councillors. I will take that as read. Our next speaker. Yes, Councillor Wood. You have a question?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, it was more just a comment. If Mr Nunn was here, I would ask the question.
Yep.
I thank him for his written submission and he's made some good points. But I just want to point out that in my view, he's quoted the Rail Safety National Law Application Act 2013, which states to ensure so far as is reasonably practicable the safety of all rail infrastructure. So he's cited that as a reason to support the application. I would say that equally applies to, if that is a requirement under the Act, then maintenance being done over the last 20 years may have prevented it from being a safety concern. So that argument can go both ways. I just wanted to point that out to Mr Nunn if he was here.
Was there okay. All right, we will move on to Mr Reid, who is here in person. Mr Reid? Mr Reid, you can just take your seat. You will get 3 minutes to speak, and you just got to press the button in front of you there, and after your 3 minutes, councillors may ask you questions. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Mr Reid, you just got to press the button. Yep. Thank you.
Madam Mayor and councillors and others present, thank you for hearing us. I want to start by pointing out the excitement that there was in 1890, 91, etc., when the railway arrived in Bacchus Marsh. I have here the CRISP Railway Guide, and apart from having a tour and guiding you through the total journey from Melbourne, all stations through to Adelaide, it also tells you that you can travel from Bacchus Marsh first class and return for 8 shillings, and you can have a second class ticket for 5 shillings and 6pence. So the railway heritage began in Bacchus Marsh in 1890, and if you look at the first photograph that I have on the sheet, I've distributed, I hope everyone has got a copy of the 3 photographs I wish to speak to. The first photograph comes from the State Library of Victoria, and it shows the station as it was around the turn of the century. The date on the photograph is a little unclear. It says between 1890 and 1915, but my guess is it's somewhere around 1900. That's pure guesswork. I'm just looking at the vegetation in the picture and so on, so it looks as if the station by then is well established. But the building in question is certainly in the photograph. You can see the 2-storey signal box on the right-hand side of the photograph. In its heyday, it was quite a pleasant-looking building. You'll see there are finials and decorations on the gables and so on, some of which have disappeared over the years. The building was built by J. Brown. If you look at the Victorian Government Gazette in 1890, the contract was let on the 7th of March 1890, and he built I presume it was built the signal box, and it still remains a central part of the railway complex. The Mirrabul Shire Heritage Overlay lists the significance of the railway complex as HO 168. It's of local heritage significance. The signal box with the railway building, the train turntable and the goods shed are still an important part of the railway heritage of Bacchus Marsh. So this reminds us about the importance of the railway complex for Bacchus Marsh. Local industry, commuting to Melbourne and Ballarat still play an important role. You can see there that I've listed some of the ways in which it's been used over the years. carrying 400 coal wagons a day, firewood and dairy produce from Bacchus Marsh. Looking at photograph number 2, this is the present day photograph, and this is the day that steam rail travelled through Bacchus Marsh. It was only a few weeks ago. It's still an important part of people's railway experience, and the signal box is an integral part of the railway complex. Going to the last photograph, it's my understanding, without having had an opportunity to look inside, that all the signal equipment is still in there. I believe people who have seen it a few years ago have told me that it's still there, and even though it is mechanical, it doesn't function anymore. It's still part of the signal box. And just to finish up, box has a quite small footprint. It's 10 metres by 5 metres, so it's actually space on the ground is quite small compared with the rest of the complex. But what's happened over the years is it's been killed off by neglect, and the rail people who are responsible for it have done no work on it at least 20 years, maybe more, and you can see that it looks quite neglected. The building, though, could be restored and could be still an important part of our railway heritage. And I was talking to Paul before about the possibility that we could have volunteers restore it, but of course, I suppose that's not possible on railway land. But it's an act of destruction for the railways to let it deteriorate to the stage that it has. But that doesn't mean it should be pulled down. Restoration is the solution, not demolition. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr Reid. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Reid? Councillor Tatchell.
Yeah, good to see you, Bob. We've had this issue before, of course, in Moorabool, with where I think over a period of time the Ludlow station sat. And there was a lot of argument about it, and eventually there was a solution, and of course it's a good result in the end. The interesting thing about this box, of course, is that it's in a different position on the platform, which means that it creates some problems in terms of how the public can restore it. And I don't know whether there's a solution in there, and you may, as to whether, the goodwill of the rail should be to restore it themselves as part of that heritage thing. It's interesting that you noted the cost of 8 shillings to go to Melbourne. If we had a cost of living crisis today,
that was first class.
We had one then. Like we're in strife. There was a bit of money back then to jump on the train. I sort of applaud the recommendation here in some respects, but it's a very tangled web. I mean, I know in Balan we have the Friends of the Railway Station that are allowed to do work around the property, and I'm not sure where we go, but maybe a committee of some description. So the question, of course, Madam Mayor, is there something we could set up a committee that a proposal could be made for the restoration, and maybe some sort of building fund to put it back from whence it came?
Well, the building fund is a complex area, with trust accounts and various things like that. But a support group certainly, I think, would be a possibility. I don't know how much pressure the railways, if it's a pressure group. If it's a volunteer group, you've got a problem of working on railway property and getting permission to do that. But I think that a support group, certainly, and if it's called Friends of the Signal Box or Friends of Railway Heritage, they're already... Look, it's one of the things I find very interesting. There are quite a significant number of railway enthusiasts out there. Now, they're often doing their own thing, but if you could get them together, that'd be a powerful influence. Anyway.
Yes, Councillor Tatchell. Do you have another
just
question?
Have a supplementary question. I was at the Good Shed in Ballarat on Saturday night, and this was the same argument that the Ballarat Council, where what are they going to do with the sheds that were no longer used, or parts of that railway line that were no longer used. So, it occurred to me that council has a role in this somewhere as part of our heritage group to maybe help with those submissions. But I suppose the question is that it's been looked at over a number of years, and I know this discussion has been held on a number of occasions. Has there ever been any estimates done what it would cost to restore it?
Not to my knowledge. The only thing, this is not really evidence, I spoke to the station master or someone, I'm not sure if it was a station master or it was a railway employee anyway, who said, you know, oh, you can't do that, it's going to cost $500,000. But I don't know whether there was any evidence behind that. No idea at all. I'm sure that if volunteers did it, they could do it for less than that.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Bob, for that presentation, and thank you for the information you provided. I commend you and the wider Historical Society group on the job you do in preserving local history. I can advise everyone, Madam Mayor, that after attending the Heritage Advisory Committee meeting last week, they were very strongly in favour of fighting to retain this important piece of local history. My question is slightly off track, but Bob's right in that this is an important part of Bacchus Marsh's history, and it's certainly something we should fight to preserve. The signalling mechanisms are up in there, and Bob, my question is a bit strange, but those signalling boxes could tell a lot of stories. I was very fortunate that I was taken up there by a colleague who was working there the night the Ballarat train came down the hill and lost its brakes. And he pushed the signal up and changed the tracks to just keep on a straight path. And as we know, it rolled and it took out half the station that night. So I think that was 35 years ago. So that signalling box is an important piece of history, and that's probably only one of the many stories that could tell. So thank you for your presentation tonight.
Did you have a question, Councillor Wood?
No, I don't really. It was just a comment.
Thank you for your question.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions? Councillor Berry.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I actually have a question for officers.
Yes.
It's very sad to read that this signal box was decommissioned in 2005, that no work has been done on the restoration of the signal box to keep it in good condition. Would VTRAC be aware of the heritage overlay listing in Mirrabul Shire's listings?
We're still up.
So through the chair, they should be aware of it. So there are quite a number of historic rail stations, and they would be aware that a lot of stations do have heritage significance. So they've actually got heritage people that do work for V-Line, so they would have been aware of this particular site.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr Reid or officers? No. Mr Reid, you can take your seat in the gallery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, councillors... Oh, sorry. No, we have another speaker. Okay, so I will ask Mr Hogan to... Thank you, Mr Hogan. Mr Hogan, you will have 3 minutes to speak, and just press it until it goes green. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors and council officers. Tim Hogan. I'm a committee member of the Bacchus Marsh and District Historical Society, and yes, similar to Bob, we're speaking here in opposing a permit for the signal box to be demolished. Basically, the Historical Society considers the signal box to have significant local heritage values, and we've used the commonly accepted and international standard sort of heritage criteria that is used globally and state and national level. And what we've done in our written submission is just applied those principles and see whether they apply locally. We think they do. So most of the criteria used to assess things, structures like this, whether it's of social significance, aesthetic, architectural, things like that, whether it's an exemplar of its type, we think most of those criteria are either met or exceeded by the nature of this building. And it really, as Bob mentioned, really represents, there's a lovely intact historical railway precinct here. You've got 4 elements. You've got the turntable, you've got the brick station built in 1889, and the goods shed built about the same time, and the signal box is actually built in 1890 almost immediately after. So it's all from that time. It's not an add-on 10 or 20 years later. Sadly, signal boxes appear to be under threat around the state. I know of one in Benalla that's gone, one in North Geelong that's gone. So before we know it, they might all disappear. So I think it would be a great shame if this happened here. So rather than, there's been talk about costs, and of course there are costs, but we're not talking the Taj Mahal on the other hand. So, you know, I think these things should be seen as assets. They're assets for the community. They bring tourism interest. They just bring civic value, I suppose, or amenity and just joy, if you want to use a word like that. So I think that's worthy of preservation, at least, and maintenance. And I think we should be seeing them as an opportunity rather than a cost. And I'd really like to see ways explored. We've talked a little bit about a group or something, but even just have it maintained, or at least restored, or even repurposed. So I think we should be thinking wide, that if it's demolished or removed, none of that's possible. None of it's just gone. And everyone in 100 years' time will look at the photos, which we've got lots of, and say, what a shame it went. So that's, as a historical society, that's obviously our interest, but we think it's objectively got value for the community, and it's worth thinking this through, you know, and seeing what options there are. And I believe there are options. So that's in a nutshell, our case. We think it's important, significant.
Thank you, Mr Hogan. Councillors, do we have any further questions for Mr Hogan? Yes, Councillor Tatchell.
One for the officers as
Yes.
well. The signal box, where it sits on top of the platform, obviously it's hollow below the platform for the mechanisms, is that right?
Well, you need to ask a technical person. It looks like it does. I've been told it does. I've been told that the equipment inside is very extensive and heavy and large. You know, it's a bit of a technological marvel for its day when you read about what they did.
So does it have the footing in the boxwork? So it actually sits on a footing above the ground? Have you seen underneath, or is that?
No, I haven't had a chance to have a look inside. So I don't know what the innards are like, and I don't really have the technical knowledge to describe it or analyse it, but I know there's a lot of gear, you know, and heavy gear.
Well, that's what leads me to the question of officers to see what it is, but without that information, but I will ask the question anyway, that are there any future plans? I noted in the media that 9-car trains of having their platforms extended for rural transport, and this is to do with Melton, of course, and the fact that the state government built one of the platforms 15 metres short, which I think is hilarious, but anyway, they probably don't. It's probably going to cost them $10 million to fix it. But are there any plans in place to extend the station that's there now in terms of for future carriages? And is there a significance to why the signal box has to be removed, demolition by neglect because of that? So it's getting a new platform, basically.
Yep. Mr Lovell or Mr Bazut now?
I suppose the question's been asked about like future works or whether trains in the future will require, you know, longer carriages and therefore a longer platform, but it will not only affect the signal box, it'll also affect the actual Baxmarsh station. So even if you're altering the platform, you are altering its particular fabric. So particularly, and again, trains can be repurposed about openings. The whole idea is when you've got a heritage overlay and contributory dwellings is to protect those particular dwellings where other infrastructure that don't have that heritage significance, they can be remodelled or repurposed for a future purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr Hogan? Okay. Thank you, Mr Hogan. You can take a seat in the gallery.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan, you had a question for officers?
A couple, if I may, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I note in the written report by Mr Nunn, he talks about the condition of the building, etc. Was there a sort of an engineer's report that accompanied his his letter, or not? That's the first question.
Mr Lovell.
So through the chair, they did look at the two alternatives and they did look at a restoration plan. So that restoration plan does look at structural issues.
Yep.
So there was the capacity, including any structural works that needed to be repaired.
So they did actually forward a supplementary question. Did they forward an engineer's assessment of the condition of the building that came in or not?
I'd have to take that on notice whether there's been an actual qualified engineer who provided the advice back to the heritage consultants.
And another question I have is, given that this is Transport Zone 1, and which is sort of unique to railways, etc., what real weight does the overlays that council have over such zones, given they're a public authority?
Mr Lovell.
So through the chair, the zone, of course, is to facilitate transport purposes, in this case, rail works. The control is the heritage overlay, so it's an overlay control over the zoning, so that has primary consideration in making a planning decision.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? No? All right. Councillors, you have a recommendation in your papers, and I'll just make it very clear that the recommendation is to issue a refusal to grant a planning permit for the demolish the signal box. Do I have a councillor to move the recommendation? Councillor Edwards, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Ward. Do I have any dissent?
I have a question, if I may.
Yes.
The people who are presenting here today, this doesn't give them the comfort that they need. This is only a recommendation to refuse a request from VicTrack to demolish that. And given it was closed in 2000, or shut down in 2005, and I think my colleague Councillor Tatchell called it demolition by neglect, what mechanism is going to preserve this going forward, or is it just going to fall down?
Good question. Mr Lovell, could you add to that at all?
So I suppose if going forward with this thing, if the issue would be about making sure it isn't demolition by neglect, so it doesn't get to such a stage that it actually does fall down. So I suppose what council officers can do is again have those discussions with the applicant. It is contributory building, which they should then be having a restoration plan in place and an ongoing maintenance. It can't be just restore, then leave for another 20 years and the same situation occurs again.
Councillor Tatchell, you had a question?
Yeah, I've got a similar question. On the basis that we've put in a recommendation to refuse.
Yep.
Did our building surveyor have a look?
Mr Lovell? No?
The municipal building surveyor hasn't provided any advice on this application.
No, that's just a question. It just maybe someone we could use.
Okay. Councillor Edwards.
Just a question. I know we were about to go to vote, but and we did have discussions earlier about demolition through neglect. Council does have the ability to write to VicTrack to point out that it would be considered demolition by neglect if they would not do anything.
Mr Bazit now.
Through you, Madam Chair, there's clear guidelines in the legislation that you can't allow demolition by neglect. There can be penalties as well, and council has the ability to write to the minister to advise that we've got concerns. So there are actions that we can take. And then just in relation to the municipal building surveyor, if there's a planning trigger, they can't issue a approval for demolition or building certificate or building approval for demolition because they need to be satisfied that the planning controls or the planning requirements has been met.
Yes, Councillor Edwards.
If the seconder will accept, I'd like to add another point that council writes to the appropriate minister to express our concerns that it's demolition by neglect.
Councillor Ward? Yes? Okay. So we have a mover and a seconder. Do I have any dissent?
I've got a question.
Another question, Councillor Simon?
Well, in the dark recesses of my mind, I think there was a situation like this in the Ballarat station, wasn't there, on Lydiard Street? Or does anyone recall that? Something about the signal box? Yes. Councillor Tatchell recalls it. What happened?
Does ring a bell?
That's how it ended up at council to say, and that's how they build up a proposal to resolve the issue. And ultimately they got that problem with the gates.
Okay.
But they haven't had a solution, but they have done exactly what Councillor Edwards has just suggested. And that'll stay in the abeyance, I reckon. So they'll get their gates, I'll bet you. They won't look like the old ones, but they'll be close. So.
Okay, I have a mover and a seconder. Do I have any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, I'll...
That's been with the board a couple of times in this life too, so you sort of, boards are a bit different, which would make it easier to restore.
Maybe. Item 7.5, development of a dwelling at 6... I can never say this word. Ellerslie Court, Ellerslie Court, Bacchus Marsh. There is one speaker to this item, Mr. Robson. I will ask Mr. Robson to come forward. Thank you. And Mr. Robson, you have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. James Robson again, acting on behalf of the applicant in relation to this matter. I've got Mr. Jordan Jeffrey with me here today, who is the applicant, who is available to answer any specific questions you may have surrounding the proposal. So the proposal in this instance proposes to develop a dwelling on the site to replace a previously existing, now demolished home. This proposal came before council for consideration back in June. However, was deferred to allow the proponent to reassess his application and the proposal and provide an updated development package to address some of the issues raised by council officers. The amended proposal now includes a reduced overall height of the dwelling, along with an updated landscape plan providing significant additional landscaping across the site, particularly around the site boundaries. So on balance, Jordan has no significant concerns in relation to the bulk of the permit conditions proposed by officers. However, again, there's one issue that he would like raised this evening. The applicant would like council to reconsider the imposition of condition 1B, which requires a minimum setback of 5 metres to achieve compliance with condition 8A. Now, condition 8A requires that the building areas must be set back from all trees to sufficiently protect tree root zones identified by a qualified arborist. Sorry, excuse me. The imposition of this condition largely affects the western wing of the proposed dwelling, which currently provides for a 4.1 metre setback from the north, west and southern boundaries. Adjacent to that wing of the proposed structure. Jordan's had some discussions with a qualified arborist who has indicated that 4.1 metres is an adequate setback from the boundaries to allow for adequate growth of the weeping lily pillies that are proposed, as well as the dwarf yellow gums around the boundary and the proposed yellow gum on the southwestern corner. On this basis, we say that the proposed 4.1 metre setback, in line with the plans already lodged, is adequate to comply with condition 8A. Therefore, the imposition of condition 1B and its requirement for a 5 metre setback is not necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Robson.
That's it.
That's it. Councillors, any questions for Mr. Robson? Or sorry, what was the applicant's name?
Jordan Jeffrey.
I will allow councillors to ask Jordan questions if Jordan is happy to. Councillor Dudzik.
Is the applicant very clear that if they conduct a commercial business there as a dance studio, that they'll be in breach of the permit conditions and action can be taken?
Mr. Robson.
Yes, so that was covered within the application process. Jordan's more than clear that there's no intent to undertake a commercial activity on the site.
Councillor Tatchell.
I note that one of the objectors, two of them pulled out, or two withdrew. Who was the third one, and what was their objection?
Mr Lovell.
The remaining objector is the immediate property to the north, and their objections remain that they were still concerned about the dwelling and the historic loss of vegetation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just trying to reconcile some of the conditions, and in the body of the report, at the paragraph above the photo on page 47, and I quote, "A 4-bedroom brick veneer, single-storey dwelling, swimming pool and small, and all vegetation were removed from the site in late 2023. So I'm assuming it was just moonscaped in 2023, okay. So the tree that's having to set back from is what, on their neighbouring property?
Mr Robson.
So I can't answer that question, I'm sorry. I'd have to refer to... I'm not aware of any issues with the neighbouring property trees.
Mr Lovell, are you able to help out with this answer, or we'll see if Mr Lovell can clarify it all?
Yeah, so through the chair, a number of trees were identified. I suppose what might be an easier aerial photograph is to look at figure 2 on page 48 of the papers. There are quite a number of neighbouring trees. Now, there's no intent to either trim those trees or affect the trees through the proposed building works. The setback proposed, which is that nominated 5, that is to protect the new trees on the site, so the new trees do not compromise the building foundations to the new dwelling.
So the 5 metre setback is from the trees that are proposed to be planted.
So through the chair, it is the new landscaping is along the property boundaries and is to allow a gap between the property boundary and 5 metres as sufficient space for particularly those eucalypts to grow without being, as I said, compromising the new dwelling.
Yeah, so our arborist advice is that 4.1 metres as proposed is an adequate space for those new trees to grow.
So what? Sorry, just another question. I've got to get this tree thing sorted out.
Yes, Councillor.
So the species of trees that are proposed to be planted are what?
So there's weeping lily pillies along the western boundary.
Right.
There's a couple of... there was a couple of dwarf yellow gums along the northern boundary.
Right.
And there's a large yellow gum on the southwestern corner.
So what would mature trees of those species, height and density, grow to?
The heights...
Mature species.
I believe the yellow gum was 10 to 14 metres. I'd have to double check. I think the weeping lily pillies were up to 10 metres, but managed at 4, I think.
Okay.
And the dwarf yellow gums were of similar size to the weeping lily pillies.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure who is next. I think Councillor Berry.
I was, but
Yes.
my question was answered through Tom's question.
Nothing else?
Thank you. No.
Councillor Ward.
Madam Mayor, I was prepared to, pardon me, I was prepared to move the recommendation with an amendment of 1B to minimum building setback of 4.1 metres.
Okay, thank you. Was there any other questions? Yes. Councillor Dudzik.
I would request the officer's opinion of 4.1 metres because I don't know what the appropriate setback would be and whether 4.1 or 5 is considered acceptable.
Mr Lovell.
So through the chair, there's quite actually a number of tree species. So there were yellow gums, yellow box, red stringy barks, red box. Now, all those trees, according to the planning schedule, they've got a maturity height of 10, 12, 12 and 11 metres. So they are quite large trees, and that's why that 5 metres was put in there. So there's sufficient area, because we don't want to have a situation where and again, they've decided for some quite large plantings, and it's particularly with those laid plantings that they could compromise foundations to that proposed dwelling. Councillor
Berry, did you have another question? Okay,
I'd like to second the motion Councillor Ward put forward.
okay. So we have a mover and a seconder. Any other questions? Councillor Dudzik.
Would we require a setback of 4.1 in other situations, or would it have to be 5?
So through the chair, the 5 metres applies particularly to those, as I said, those 5 species that we've identified that are quite large.
Okay. Dudzik, you can.
So why have those particular species been identified?
Mr. Lovell.
So through the chair, the applicants proposed a series of, different trees and plantings, but some of the trees are quite large, as I said before, between that 12 and 12 metre in height, so they are quite significant landscaping that they are proposing. As I said, some of the other plants that were nominated through the applicant, 8 metres, 4 metres, 7 metres, they don't require larger tree protection zones, just those large, particularly those large eucalypts that require the tree protection zones.
Councillor Sullivan, you had a question?
So the 5 metres, I take it then, is to protect the root zone of the tree, basically. Okay. Do they, and I'm not an arborist, don't get me wrong, but I do know that some trees have more invasive root systems than others. Are these of that type? And that's why you want the greater distance.
Are you asking Mr. Robson?
If I can provide
Yes, Mr.
some sort of answer, the trees have been selected based on the preferred planting list prepared by Mirrabul Shire, as I understand it.
Great.
Mr. Lovell, would you like to add to that or not? You're right. No? Okay. Councillor Dudzik.
Is it just one boundary that causes a problem for the applicant, or is it all of them? Is it just one side?
Mr.
So
Robson.
the proposal includes a 4.1 metre setback from the western boundary. There is a small portion of that western wing on the north and south of the dwelling that also has a 4.1 metre setback. Through the central area of the dwelling, it's a H shape. Through the central area, there's no issue because the setbacks are quite significant from the boundaries. And then on the eastern end of the dwelling, it is the north section of the wing is 4.1 metres setback, but only for a width of 9 metres or thereabouts, as well as the southern end of that eastern wing. So that the main concern for the applicant here is that western edge, where effectively that whole western wing is set back 4.1 metres off the western, northern and southern boundaries.
Any other questions? No. Okay. So, Councillor Ward, you have proposed an alternate. Could you clarify to make sure that we have the conditions correct?
Thank you, Madam
Item
Mayor.
1.
Yeah, I'm proposing to move the recommendation with amendment to 1B, that the minimum building setback of 4.1 metres is applied to achieve compliance with condition 8A.
Councillor, did you second it? Yep. Yes. Do I have any dissent? All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Item 8, update of trends, issues and other matters. I will now ask the Executive Manager of Community Planning and Development, do we have any updates for the community?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Now updates.
Item 9, Mr Zoutnow, do we have any updates on VCAT decisions?
No new updates, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Item 10, other business. Councillors, I will go around the room. Is there any other business that arises? Councillor Sullivan? No. Councillor Ward?
No other business, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Tatchell?
Just one item.
Yes.
Madam Mayor, I just want an update on Golden Prize, where we're up to with that. I don't care who answers it.
Mr Bazet now.
So
Mr Lovell?
So through the chair, Golden Fry, so 12 Aerodrome Road in Parwin, they've received an amended planning permit to allow a limited operation with regards to their trade waste. So they're going to have on-site trade waste for a 6-month period while they're making the current arrangements through Greater Western Water to connect to the treatment plant.
Supplementary to that?
Yes, Councillor Tatchell.
So what's the arrangement in terms of compliance of that, EPA compliance with that trade waste? Is it, do we get a report to EPA? Who gets a report?
So the temporary facility, through the chair, so the temporary facility has got environmental health approval and Greater Western Water approval, and the issue, as I said, it's only a temporary arrangement. They are still going through the pipeline, as I said, to that connection to the Greater Western Water treatment plant, which has got Greater Western Water's, or they've got the agreement in place, and they're just getting the works, and the works for that infrastructure will take between 4 to 6 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Berry.
No other business, thank you.
Councillor Dudzik.
No other business, thank you.
Councillor Edwards. Nope. Thank you. Date of next meeting, date of the next Development Assessment Committee meeting is scheduled for Wednesday the 11th of September 2024. Councillors, officers and members of the public, thank you for attending tonight, and I will now declare the meeting closed. Thank you.